Walk into any Gates Barbecue restaurant in Kansas City, and you'll notice briskets, red roofs, and the smiling man in a tuxedo. What you won't notice, however, is the family machine that's running everything underneath. 5 restaurants, a national sauce operation, a commissary, apartment holdings, community projects, and roughly 80 years of Black ownership in a city that did not always make ownership easy. The Gates family publishes no neat Forbes number, but if you want Kansas City's clearest multi-generational Black business dynasty, this is the family you have to understand. And the wild part is that the empire began with a restaurant that opened after the jazz clubs closed. Let's unravel the full picture behind one of the richest Black families in Kansas City, the restaurant that woke up at midnight. To understand the Gates family, you have to begin in the old 18th and Vine district, when the neighborhood was alive with jazz, baseball, packed clubs, and Black businesses serving customers who were not always welcome elsewhere. Kansas City barbecue had already been shaped by Henry Perry, the city's original barbecue king. Perry trained pitmen who trained others, so the tradition grew less like a recipe book and more like a family tree with smoke coming out of it. One branch of that tree ran through Arthur Pinkard, a Perry-trained pitmaster working at a restaurant called Old Kentuck Barbecue. In 1946, George and Arzelia Gates bought the business. They did not invent Kansas City barbecue from nothing, and the family has never needed to pretend they did. Their genius was taking an existing tradition, preserving the flavor, and then building a system around it that could survive generations. The original operation sat near 19th and Vine, and in the earliest years it reportedly did not really wake up until the jazz clubs began letting out. George Gates II, the founder's grandson, later explained that his grandfather might not open until almost 2 in the morning. That is an incredible business model when you think about it. Ignore breakfast, ignore lunch, wait for the saxophones to stop, and then feed half the neighborhood. It worked because the restaurant sat inside the rhythm of Black Kansas City. Musicians, night shift workers, and people leaving clubs all came through. The city was already moving, and the Gates family positioned itself where that movement became hungry. There is a lesson in that which modern founders love to describe using words like consumer behavior. George and Arzelia called it staying open late. Their son Ollie was still a teenager when the family bought Old Kentuck, which meant his business education began with smoke in his eyes and work waiting after school. He would later joke that the smoke bothered him so much he promised himself he would get away and never enter another barbecue restaurant again. That plan aged beautifully. The engineer who cleaned up barbecue. Ollie Gates did not enter the business as a celebrity pitmaster with a television show and a line of expensive knives. He studied, worked with his hands, and approached barbecue like an engineering problem that happened to be covered in sauce. He attended Lincoln High School, went to college on a football scholarship, transferred to Lincoln University, and earned his degree while working as a bricklayer. He then trained through the Army's engineering school and served as an officer in the Corps of Engineers during the early period of military integration. So by the time Ollie returned to Kansas City, he had absorbed 3 disciplines that do not normally appear together on a restaurant resume: engineering, military organization, and masonry. Most barbecue owners know how to build a fire. Ollie could build the building around it. When George died in 1960, Ollie took control of a respected restaurant inside an industry with an image problem. Barbecue was loved, yet many establishments were still dismissed as greasy shacks by the tracks. Watching modern fast food chains rise, Ollie realized nostalgia would not protect the family. Gates needed consistent food, intentional buildings, sharp staff, and clean dining rooms. You could keep the smoke without keeping the stereotype. This is where Gates stopped being merely a restaurant and became a brand. The family standardized recipes, put employees in neat uniforms, and modernized the dining rooms. Ollie was not making barbecue fancy. He was making it impossible to dismiss. Then came the visual language: the red roofs, the bold signs, and the struttin' man logo wearing a tuxedo and top hat. The character was inspired by Louis Armstrong's "Struttin' with some barbecue," and the message was beautifully simple. You could arrive in work clothes, a prom dress, a business suit, or whatever survived the night before. Once you walked in, everybody could strut. Putting a tuxedo on a barbecue logo sounds ridiculous until you realize it solved the positioning problem in one picture. smoky and informal, but polished, confident, and impossible to look down on. Even the famous greeting had more going on than people realized. "Hi, may I help you?" became a trademark because it was fast, memorable, and slightly terrifying when you were still trying to locate the ribs on the menu. But Ollie later explained that the greeting also came from a practical instinct. In the neighborhood where he grew up, not everybody entering a business had good intentions. Greeting each customer immediately meant recognizing every person who crossed the door, friendly, unfriendly, or simply confused by the speed of the line. Hospitality and security in 5 words. Efficient. Very on brand for an engineer. Speaking of running a food business with an engineer's precision, a lot of it comes down to how the brain performs when it matters. That's the idea behind an audio series called the Genius Switch. It's based on the neuroscience of the flow state, that mode where focus and creativity click at the same time, and the whole routine is just listening with headphones a few minutes a day. It's a one-time $39, less than a single online course, and it's backed by a 90-day money-back guarantee, so you can test it on yourself with nothing to lose. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to the empire, and the move most people in that industry never even attempt. The family built the buildings too. Plenty of restaurant dynasties lease somebody else's space. Gates made the space part of the business. Ollie was a bricklayer and contractor by trade, and he helped build the family's early properties. His son George remembers carrying bricks, digging trenches, and doing whatever work was required around the sites. At 1221 Brooklyn Avenue, Ollie helped erect the building himself in the late 1950s. Before it became one of the most recognizable Gates locations, part of the property operated as a lounge called the Pit. Politicians, judges, activists, and East Side power brokers gathered in the back, playing cards and talking strategy. George II called it a private club that was not technically private, a near-perfect description of local power. Ollie also opened a nightclub called OG's near 31st and Indiana. During the 1960s, it became a major black nightlife destination, a place where people dressed up, heard music, and participated in a social world that belonged to them. The restaurant and club together occupied much of the block, which meant the family was not merely renting a corner inside Kansas City's culture. It was creating the corner. This is the first major clue to the larger Gates strategy. The food brought people in, but the land and buildings allowed the family to control the experience, protect the business, and hold something that increased in value even when restaurant margins became difficult. A plate disappears in 15 minutes. Real estate has a slightly longer shelf life. The sauce that escaped Kansas City. Restaurants are stubbornly physical. Customers must arrive, pitmasters must watch the fire, and somebody must shout before the customer is emotionally ready to order. Sauce has no such limitations. Demand for Gates sauce kept growing, and in 1975 the family began pushing the product into grocery stores. Some supermarkets hesitated because barbecue sauce from a local restaurant did not yet look like a guaranteed national category. The family kept pressing until major stores across the metro carried it. In 1983, Gates began national distribution, and the following year it opened a modern commissary to manufacture and distribute sauces and spices. That move changed the asset math completely. A restaurant can serve only the people who reach the building. A bottle can leave Kansas City without losing the family name. The industrial story began in a wonderfully unindustrial way. George II says he started making sauce at around 7 in a basement Maytag washing machine. When ingredients ran out, he sometimes left them out, a creative choice his father did not celebrate. He recruited friends, paid them in fries, and eventually graduated to a 100-gallon tub. Today, he is the chief operating officer of Gates BBQ. That is succession the old-fashioned way. Start by sweeping the parking lot, move into unauthorized sauce experiments, and one day somebody gives you an executive title because you have already worked every job that can ruin your shoes. George describes the business as 3 connected pieces: restaurants, products, and real estate. Sauce crosses borders, property stabilizes the family, and the restaurants remain the smoky glue holding everything together. That balance matters. A supermarket-only brand could lose its soul. Restaurants alone would remain geographically trapped. Gates kept the institution local while letting the product travel. It is a little like sending an ambassador in a glass bottle, except this ambassador is excellent on fries. The asset math nobody can see. This is where people make the mistake of trying to value Gates like a normal restaurant chain. A public company would disclose sales, margins, leases, and executive pay. Gates discloses almost none of that because it remains private. There is no ticker symbol blinking above the barbecue pit and no analyst asking why brisket costs rose 3% this quarter. What can be seen is the structure: 5 operating restaurants listed today, a manufacturing commissary, sauces and seasonings sold beyond the dining rooms, family-owned apartment interests around the east side, and a brand with 8 decades of accumulated recognition. Each piece values the others. The restaurants make the sauce authentic. The sauce advertises the restaurants in distant kitchens. The property keeps part of the family wealth attached to land instead of letting every dollar disappear into payroll, meat, and utilities. That is why an exact family fortune would be guesswork, but dismissing the family because no public number exists would be equally foolish. Private wealth often looks smaller from outside precisely because nobody is required to show you the receipts. And Gates has another asset competitors cannot simply purchase: habit. Kansas Cityans have practiced ordering there for generations. Even the panic in the line is inherited. Why the family stayed on the east side? The easiest way to understand Gates' power is to study where the family chose not to go. As Kansas City expanded south and suburban development offered cleaner, newer commercial opportunities, Ollie once suggested that the family should follow the movement. His father took him to a corner near 12th and Brooklyn, told him to look west, and asked what he saw. Ollie said downtown. His father's answer was essentially that downtown was not going anywhere. He was right. Downtown improved, highways shifted, neighborhoods struggled and recovered, but the family's position near the center of the city remained valuable. That was not pure sentiment. It was geographic thinking. Owning business and property in an overlooked neighborhood lets a family shape what happens when attention returns. George II has said the family owns apartment properties around the area as part of its effort to invest locally and support nearby businesses. He has also explained that Gates declined opportunities to move into certain entertainment districts because another generic restaurant would make a living, but it would not make a statement. The family preferred locations where its presence meant something. Restaurant expansion usually means traffic counts and easy parking. Gates added another question. Does this building strengthen the community that strengthened us? Sometimes that choice costs growth. It also creates loyalty that no advertising agency can manufacture. The empire beyond the cash register. In 1984, Ollie Gates and Bishop James Tyndall founded the 12th Street Heritage Development Corporation to help revitalize East Kansas City. This organization is not a private Gates holding company, and it is now led independently, which is important to say clearly. But Ollie's role in creating it reveals how he understood wealth. A successful restaurant on a collapsing block is not a complete victory. 12th Street Heritage grew into an organization working in affordable housing, youth programs, and second-chance employment. It is involved in Jazz Hill, whose $38 million renovation preserves 181 affordable homes, and became a co-owner in Redeveloping Parade Park, one of the country's earliest Black-owned housing cooperatives. The Parade Park plan is enormous by neighborhood nonprofit standards. More than 1,000 residential units across affordable, workforce, market rate, senior, and ownership options, with a full build-out estimated above $300 million. The organization also manages a senior living community and runs a re-entry program whose participants help maintain hundreds of properties each month. This is where a successful family gives back becomes too soft. Ollie helped create an institution capable of owning and redeveloping housing at scale. Charity pays one bill. Development changes who controls the block. And control matters in East Kansas City, where redlining, segregation, disinvestment, and urban renewal repeatedly separated Black families from property value. Ollie once said the biggest issue facing the Black community was economics. He did not say branding, visibility, or inspirational speeches. Economics. So the family's larger legacy follows a consistent logic. Own the restaurant instead of merely working in it. Build the building instead of waiting for a landlord. Bottle the sauce instead of surrendering distribution. Hold apartments near the business. Help create an institution capable of preserving housing. Smoke is the visible part. Ownership is the recipe. The fire that tested the family. A business built around wood, grease, and open pits eventually receives an unpleasant reminder that fire does not respect family history. In 2015, fire traveled from the pits into the ductwork and attic of the Independence location, destroying the building. For a family business, that means employees displaced, customers cut off, and decades of memories behind caution tape. George and Kiva Gates immediately spoke about rebuilding and moving the roughly 30 to 35 workers into other family locations. 2 years later, the Independence restaurant reopened in a completely rebuilt building. The family did not treat the location as an underperforming square on a spreadsheet. It rebuilt because the restaurant had become part of the community's routine, especially around game days. There is also something almost poetic about a barbecue dynasty being tested by fire and answering, "Fine, we will build another pit." The sports, music, and political table. Gates became powerful partly because everybody eventually passed through the same line. The early restaurant sat near Municipal Stadium, and the family began taking food into the press box. Barbecue fused with Kansas City sports so completely that visiting NFL teams now arrive expecting it. An awkward pre-game tribute to the city they are trying to beat. The Brooklyn location also kept music in the story. Live performances returned to a building that had hosted nightlife and political conversations long before mixed-use cultural venue became developer language. And now the brand is receiving another cultural close-up. Kansas City native Jason Sudeikis chose Gates as a featured hometown stop in the 2026 return of Ted Lasso, introducing the fictional visitors to the same sauce locals have argued about for generations. That is the kind of marketing most companies would pay a painful amount of money to manufacture. Gates earned it by being present long enough to become part of the city's personality. That may be the family's most valuable asset of all. Customers do not discuss Gates like a neutral restaurant choice. They discuss it like a relative, with loyalty, criticism, memories, and very specific opinions about what should be ordered. A brand is strong when people recognize the logo. An institution is strong when people feel entitled to argue about it. Succession without selling the soul. The dangerous moment in any family empire comes when the founder's discipline becomes the descendant's inheritance. A famous name is much easier to inherit than the patience required to protect it. A 2024 profile reported that 10 family members remained active. Ali, now in his 90s, continued as owner and president. George II served as chief operating officer. And relatives held operational and public-facing roles after growing up sweeping lots, working counters, and building sauce batches. That is not accidental. George says he had no choice. He was born into the work. He remembers his father explaining that if he ate and slept on Sunday, he could work on Sunday too. Harsh, slightly effective. The restaurants are approaching 80 years old, so the evidence is annoyingly strong. The family has experimented with expansion, including a period operating in Las Vegas. But it has resisted turning Gates into a loose franchise system where the logo travels farther than the quality control. Wood-fired barbecue is difficult to standardize because the pit does not have a thermostat. The fire does not read an operations manual, and the meat does not care about your quarterly targets. That limitation may have protected the dynasty. The family could probably have sold the brand, licensed the name more aggressively, or handed the restaurants to outside operators. Instead, it kept the operation private and family-centered, accepting slower growth in exchange for control. This is where the title's real meaning lives. The family accumulated more than cash: a private company, intellectual property, manufacturing, real estate, community institutions, and 3 generations of knowledge no wire transfer can recreate. A buyer could purchase buildings and recipes. Buying the right to shout at Kansas City before it orders would be much more complicated. The succession challenge is not simply deciding who gets an office. It is deciding which parts of the family system are allowed to change. The packaging can modernize. Distribution can grow. buildings can be rebuilt. But the wood fire, the speed, and the unmistakable attitude are protected because they are not decorations. They are the experience customers came to inherit. What the neighbors already know. People outside Kansas City may see Gates as one famous barbecue chain among several. Locals understand the deeper hierarchy. They know the greeting is coming and still feel rushed. They know the sauce can rescue disappointing meat. They know politicians, athletes, and families all pass through, and that people who moved away return to prove the city still tastes the same. They also know the family stayed. Permanence is rare. Black businesses faced discriminatory lending, restricted property access, succession problems, and buyout pressure. Gates survived segregation, recessions, fires, fast food competition, inflation, and nearly every trend capable of placing unnecessary foam on a plate. It stayed private. It stayed recognizable. It stayed connected to the East Side even while serving the entire metropolitan area. Ollie Gates once summarized the family's community philosophy with a line passed through the business. "My cup runneth over, so you can partake out the saucer." It is a wonderfully old-school sentence, but the idea is modern enough. Wealth becomes durable when the surrounding place has a reason to protect the institution that created it. The family fed the city, employed generations, held property, and helped establish housing organizations. It does not own Kansas City in the cartoon billionaire sense. No private island, rib-shaped skyscraper, or, as far as we know, barbecue yacht. Its power is more local and therefore more difficult to replace. The real answer. So, is there an audited public ranking proving the Gates family has the largest personal bank balance of every Black household in the Kansas City region? No. The company is private, the family does not disclose its net worth, and anyone claiming an exact fortune is decorating a guess with commas. But that is not why this dynasty matters. George and Arzelia Gates bought a late-night restaurant in 1946. Ollie used engineering, military precision, and bricklaying to modernize it, give barbecue a tuxedo, and create one of America's most recognizable restaurant greetings. The family then entered grocery stores, built a commissary, acquired real estate, and helped create an institution developing housing across East Kansas City. Now another generation is carrying the operation, with George II overseeing a business he entered as a child, sweeping parking lots and mixing sauce in a washing machine. That sentence alone contains the whole dynasty: labor first, ownership second, succession always. The money is private, the footprint is not. The footprint is in the red roofs, apartments, commissary, rebuilt restaurant, housing projects, and Kansas City's reflex when somebody asks where to eat. The family stayed while other people were still deciding whether the neighborhood mattered. And that is the final punchline. The Gates empire looks like a barbecue company because barbecue is what the public can smell. Underneath it is a family strategy built on land, manufacturing, cultural identity, and nearly 80 years of refusing to let somebody else own the name. That is not merely a restaurant legacy. That is Kansas City infrastructure with sauce on it. So what surprised you most? The after-hours origin? The 7-year-old making sauce in a washing machine? The real estate behind the brand? Or the greeting that doubled as crowd control? Drop your pick in the comments. Hit like if this changed how you see Kansas City barbecue. And subscribe to Black Status, because the quietest empires often hide in places everybody thinks they understand.